Follow one knight through a single ordinary day, and the first thing you notice is how much of it has nothing to do with fighting. Where he sleeps depends on who he is. A knight holding his own manor rests in a private chamber, sometimes beside his wife, in a bed raised off the cold floor. A knight serving in a lord's household more often sleeps in a shared hall or a small room near his lord's own quarters, close enough to be summoned without delay. A knight on campaign takes whatever shelter the army has found that night. Different nights, different mornings, but the same pull drags each of them upright before it is fully light. He does not eat first, he prays first. Faith in his world is not a private matter set aside for certain days. It runs on a public schedule, marked by bells from the nearest church or chapel, and a man who ignores that schedule is not seen as simply busy. He is seen as careless with his own soul, and careless men are rarely trusted with responsibility. So before food, before armor, before anything else, he kneels, sometimes alone, sometimes in a household chapel with servants and family gathered nearby. The historian Maurice Keene, in his influential study of chivalry, described this kind of religious observance as woven into knightly identity itself, not a separate habit, but part of the same expectation. Dressing follows, and it is not quick. Linen underclothes first, then tunic and hose, shoes suited to whatever the day requires. A servant helps lace the points and fasten the belts, because doing this properly is not really a one-man task. Even at breakfast, appearance carries weight. A knight is expected to look the part of his rank, whether he is about to stand in mud or stand before his lord. Breakfast, if it can be called that, is small. Bread, perhaps some ale. The day's real meal is still hours off, so the morning's work begins on very little. That work, for most knights who took the role seriously, meant training. Not sparring against another armored man, which was dangerous and saved for specific occasions, but repetition. A fixed wooden post, called a quinton, struck again and again until the motion needs no thought behind it. A warhorse worked through tight, controlled turns, because a knight who could not command his mount under pressure was of little use no matter how well he handled a blade. The historian Richard Cowper has suggested that this kind of repetitive, unglamorous drilling shaped a knight's daily life far more consistently than combat ever did. Picture the training yard itself. Mud in autumn, frozen ground by winter, the dull crack of a lance striking wood. If squires are present, and many knights were responsible for training the boys placed under them, part of the morning goes toward correcting someone else's grip and stance, rather than sharpening his own. Once the body has done its work, the day shifts toward the mind, and here, the routine splits sharply depending on circumstance. A knight holding his own land spends the late morning hearing disputes between tenants, checking what the last harvest brought in, and keeping an eye on the servants who run his household. Some historians studying how knights were raised, including Ruth Mazokaras, have noted that estate management was taught to young men alongside swordplay, treated as an equally necessary skill rather than an afterthought. A knight in a lord's service, by contrast, might spend these same hours attending council, carrying messages, or simply waiting nearby, ready to be called on. Midday brings the main meal. Bread always, meat when it can be had, wine or ale. Everyone seated according to rank if the hall is full. The meal is rarely just about food. Who sits close to whom? Who is served first? Who dines within sight of the Lord? All of it says something in a household where standing is currency almost as real as land. The afternoon rarely repeats itself. At his own manor, he might ride out to look over his fields, sit with a steward over the accounts, or receive a neighbor who has come to call. In a lord's household, the hours might fill with council matters or letters written on the lord's behalf. If a hunt has been arranged, an activity valued as much for the company it built as for the game it caught, the afternoon moves outdoors entirely into hounds, hawks, and open ground. A tournament nearby could stretch this into days rather than hours, part competition, part display, blending training and performance into one event. Whatever else fills the day, one task returns without fail before the light goes: the equipment. Mail rusts, blades dull, leather cracks, and a neglected horse can go lame. A knight whose gear failed him was not thought unlucky so much as careless. So somewhere in the fading afternoon, Time goes to checking links of mail for damage, working oil into steel, inspecting a saddle's stitching, running a hand down a horse's legs. Servants help with much of this, but a knight was still expected to know his own equipment well enough to catch what someone else might miss. As the light drops, the household gathers again for a lighter meal, still a social occasion in its own right, sometimes with music, sometimes with guests, always with conversation that carries real consequence. Marriages get discussed at this table, loyalties get quietly tested here too. Under candlelight, someone keeps replacing through the evening. Before sleep, prayer closes the day much as it opened it. Gates and doors are checked, especially at a manor answerable for its own defense. A last word passes to a steward about tomorrow. Then sleep comes, in whatever chamber the day's circumstances provided, while the candle beside the bed begins, once more, to burn toward morning. No two knights lived quite the same version of this day. Wealth, position, and whether a man served his own land or someone else's could reshape almost every hour of it. But behind nearly all of those differences sat the same pattern: prayer that marked the hours, training that asked for repetition rather than glory, responsibilities that looked more like management than warfare, and equipment that demanded care whether or not a battle was anywhere in sight. Somewhere, a bell is already marking the start of tomorrow's version of the same day.